Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Social Critic. My name is Sohail Shakeri, and today it is my great pleasure, privilege, and honor to have with us today Dr. Crisanna Shackelford, otherwise known as Shack. And it's just been a wonderful blessing for me to get introduced to Shack, and she just is just a wellspring of insight, knowledge, inspiration, and I'm just really excited for us to be able to share this conversation with you all today. So with that, I'll read you a little bit about Shaq's background, and then we'll jump into our conversation. Shaq is a powerful, passionate advocate for health and medical freedom. Her work, her speaking engagements, her writing, and her outreach have created opportunities to engage with people who are asking the hard questions about what it means to have choice. As one who has studied complexity, nonlinear systems, changing states, the gray zones, and wildly chaotic and dynamic forces that create the elements of constant change, Shack has learned to embrace uncertainty and argues that fully living is also an acknowledgement that living includes making free and fully informed choices and understanding risks. She believes that overreach by those intent on reducing risk from our lives do so by leveraging reductionist models and do so at the expense of humanity and our personal freedoms. Reductionism is the antithesis of complexity or holism. When asked, what is the first thing you say to someone who wants to know more about health freedom? Her response is simple. I want to hear from you. What is your story? When asked, what do you want to bring to the conversation? Her response is complex. She typically responds with the following. Life is complex. We need to understand this and examine how a reductionist mindset in health has led us to the place we are today. So yes, complexity in the system sciences inform my thinking. Her research passions and advocacy are largely focused on how to create ways to engage others on what we need to know to make whole and informed choices about ourselves and our planet. Jack enjoys reminding us that health freedom and medical freedom are big tent issues and encourages everyone to reach out, ask questions, and be a part of the conversations and the solutions. A mother, grandmother, speaker, author, advocate, critical and divergent thinker on the topics of how to generate foresight in an era of complexity, she brings an influential, nuanced approach to the fight of our time, our freedom to have choice and medical freedom. For more on the nexus to systems thinking, medical freedom, and how we got here, tune in. Her opinions are her own. Thank you so much, Shaq, for being with us. It's truly an honor to have you.
That was a lot. That was a mouthful, but thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, when we last spoke, we just hit on so many, I feel, just insightful topics that I just feel like our conversation just led to just one thing to another, and it just flowed into just wonderful topics that I could have just gone on for hours,
I
and
agree.
it's just it was amazing, and we started talking about how did we get here,
hmm
to place in our society where, as you had illustrated in your bio, we have overreach going on, by those who are looking to reduce risk from our lives, but in attempting to do so are really reducing us,
hmm
so trying to reduce risk, we're being reduced. And I touch on it in my book that's going to be coming out soon,
Right.
where we talk about how science has been used to reify or reduce a perspective and just put people in a specific mindset of, oh, if it's not in this specific scientific journal, or if it's
Right.
not in these scientific journals, it's not true, or it can't be true.
Right.
And um, and looking at things from a religious and philosophical perspective and historically, and I know with your work and how you have tied all these complex systems to our current fight for health and medical freedom, I just think it just goes back to that question of like, how did we get here? And I feel like you speak to it so well. And there's just, I feel like it's really important so that we can understand, so we don't make the same mistakes, in trying to solve our current predicament. So can you
So I
speak
think
a
you
little bit?
hit on it right there, Sahel. I think it's the issue of, it's an interesting choice of words, the understand piece. So as you and I talked for a long time, a couple weeks ago, and we sort of mulled over this, how do we get here? We talked about our different backgrounds. We talked about our different experiences, and we talked a lot about, hey, we read this book. Did you read that book? What do you know about this? What do you know about that? And at its core was this concept of understanding. And this concept of sort of a wide body of literature that we became exposed to that informed our thinking. So, not too long ago, I was writing, just kind of sort of putting some thoughts together on, what are some of the key challenges today? And I always go back to this issue of we have reduced and reduced and reduced our knowledge. We're up against right now, the backdrop to this is we're up against an institution that says, um, using your word, science has become rarefied. It's almost become dogmatic. There's, a lot of people kind of sort of point, oh my gosh, science has lost its reputation. We need to put it back where it belongs. We need to give it the prestige that it's, rightfully deserved. But at the same time, there have been other scientists in the field that have come out and said, "But I've got a different perspective," and it's kind of like sort of silence off with your head. I'm not going to listen to your perspective. It doesn't belong in my, in my pillar right here. And all of these different things that I've just said are all connected. This goes back to complexity. So this issue of understanding, this issue of basically being well read and widely read, being an analyst in thinking, being a divergent thinker, thinking differently about things, and not necessarily differently in a bad way, but just thinking, more broadly and reading more broadly. All these things come together to inform how we got here. And I think this is important for us to understand because I would say, and as you and I had this conversation a while ago, I would say we have learned to reduce our academic disciplines. And I think I mentioned to you, I go back to the Arab Enlightenment, and there's these, you know, crusty old guys sitting in these smoke filled bars and pubs and ancient days or whatever, and they're all exactly, they're all pontificating about science and whatever, and they want to go ahead and they want to have the legal system, and it's going to be all it's going to go into this pillar of just the legislative body, and then there's going to be the enlightened scientists that are going to be the social scientists, and then there's going to be the historians and so on and so forth, and all these pillars came out, and we brought these forward, and oh, by the way, what came along with it are methodologies. So if you're a historian, or if you're an anthropologist, as an example, you might learn how to do longitudinal studies. And that's going to be your methodology. If you're a poli-sci major, you're going to be very, very adept at how to do case study analysis. But each one of them had their own way of thinking, had their own way of analyzing, and we ultimately ended up reducing. And so along come the complexity sciences, and they basically said, we need to pull all these together. We need to have a better, more holistic understanding of what's going on as these different fields touch on each other. And I think one of the things we're missing today is, and we see this in the health field, in the scientific medical field, is we're not doing a very good job of pulling all these other issues together. And you and I have talked about this. If you go to see a doctor today, I've got something wrong with my heart, I go see a heart specialist. If I got something wrong with my shoulder, I go see a shoulder specialist, and so on and so forth. Do they talk to you about sort of the whole, your whole being? Um,
It's a great point.
Probably, yeah, broadly speaking, no. Doesn't mean they don't know, but it's not necessarily brought to the table. And I think this is where we're at again today when we look at the bigger picture of how did we get here. We have now solely focused on one dogma, which is, quite frankly, the one way we're going to treat this um, pandemic, if you will. And again, at the expense of the mental health community, at the expense of all of these other issues. So where was that holistic thinking then? And we're also seeing in a lot of places that if anybody, another critical scientist steps forward and says, I've got a different view on this, they're vilified in some cases. Um, so we have to go back and go, what is all of this? What is it? So if you say in part, how did we get here? We have a long, long history of how we got there because we've come through kind of sort of our Western education system, if you will, looking at the bits and pieces and parts. And we're not doing a very good job of looking at the whole.
Wow. You touched on a lot of important points. Um, I feel like, so one of them you hit on at the beginning of what you were talking about, I think, with the Arab Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And just that concept, I feel like is something that, it's not part of our collective Western consciousness. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you don't use Arab and Enlightenment in the same.
No, we don't. No, no. I guarantee if you had an interview with Tommy John or they're not going to say that. They'd be like, Shaq, what did you just say?
God bless. You know, like with regards to that, I mean, just the fact that recognizing that there was um, there were like you scholars, academics, um, real professors who are sitting and discussing these topics of how to run a society,
Mm-hmm.
in the Arab world, and coming up with very thoughtful, well thought out explanations about how to do that. Now granted, like you pointed out, of course it had shortcomings and its flaws, and there's always
Sure.
room to improve upon it. But just recognizing that fact, I feel like puts an important um, impression in our consciousness that, oh, wait a minute, okay, so in the Arab world, they weren't just you know um, Bedouins living in caves and abusing their
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they actually spent some time contemplating what a society would look like that is fair and just, and trying to come up with a with a model for that. And
Right.
then yeah, and then you also touched on how in our studies here in the West, things are isolated. Like we have these individual disciplines, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember, we talked about this as well in our wonderful conversation. How one person is taught to focus on one area. It's like, okay, your job is to study mathematics. All
Mm-hmm.
right, so you stick to math. That's your
Mm-hmm.
area. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're trained unconsciously and sometimes consciously, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely unconsciously, that, what, I'm an expert in math, but I don't have any right whatsoever to to attempt to speak authoritatively about science, about medicine, about the social sciences, about music, about
Mm-hmm.
any other topics. And and that really puts us, at this, like at a handicap. It's like, oh, okay, we're not allowed to question what's going on with the way that people are running our society. And like the way that you gave the example about like the shoulder pain, like when we go to the doctor,
Mm-hmm.
the traditional the Western allopathic doctor, I should say, which is what we understand in our society to be the
Right.
doctor, knowing that even though that there's naturopathic doctors, there's homeopathic
Right.
doctors, chiropractic, all sorts of, doctors and healers of all different varieties. But that's our concept of doctor. They'll focus on the shoulder
Hmm.
as opposed to looking at the system as a whole. And I think that just goes back to seeing that, hey, everything is related, everything is one. We're
Yes.
all connected. It's
We
not,
are.
you can't
Yes.
isolate things. And it's
Yeah.
like when we try to isolate things, it's like we get ourselves in trouble. So I just felt like, yeah, just
So
put
there's
points
two.
of,
So Hal, there's 2 points there, and I may actually forget the second one while I'm going down the first one. But the second one, I just want to just really quick. It goes back to this issue of interdependencies or the connectedness that we have. But to the first one, when you were talking about, and I was too, about the challenges that we've had in our education system, if you will, with this reductionist approach. We're now fast forward, or actually to an even more perilous place, which is it's the for lack of a better word, the citizen scientist is now being called into question. It's almost as if you do not dare question orthodoxy. You don't dare actually go ahead and try to study on your own. So we've even come sort of even further than that. Not only have we stovetyped our disciplines, we've now expanded that issue and we've made it a bigger problem now where if you or I were to delve deeply into a particular topic and were to have conversation about a particular issue, um, we would be considered quote unquote an amateur and therefore automatically dismissed because we didn't have the proper credential. So we get into, as I call it, the isms. The credentialism ism is another one. The authoritativism is another one. The scientism is another one. So we're getting into kind of sort of an expansion of the problem. We're adding on to problems. In fact, we're doubling down on them. So not only did we have a problem to begin with the silos of excellence, if you will, but then we've now gone ahead and said if anybody else outside of the credentialed authority that I have deemed worthy decides that they've got an opinion, it's like nope, sorry, you don't have it. You don't have the right paperwork. You're not worthy of speaking because you're not credentialed. And I think this is a problem. In fact, I just saw today, as a matter of fact, in another country, a prime minister spoke out, vehemently spoke out, and argued that the only source that anybody needs to be listening to right now is government sources. And I thought, wow, yeah, so this is where we've gone. We've gone to a place where only the government source is the approved narrative. And I think that's a very interesting place to be. It certainly doesn't mean that there's bad information sources there, but I think we're just we're continuing down a very interesting path, and we're reinforcing. To your point, we're reinforcing, um, this concept of the guy in the white coat is the only one that's allowed to speak. If you or I research on some topic, pick a topic doesn't matter. We can't opine. It's wait, it's going to be misinformation. It's like
yeah,
right, right,
exactly.
okay,
And it's like
yeah,
they own that label too, misinformation, false
right,
and so yeah, like you said, like with the government sources, I mean, it's funny, like having connections to the third world, as it
mm-hmm.
says,
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's been eye-opening in seeing like some of the discourse that we're seeing, during this whole COVID phenomenon in our society, um, and seeing how statements like that only government sources should be
Right,
read and accepted, right? Like with
right,
for medical literature.
mm-hmm.
Now, in high school and in college, when we were studying these dictatorial societies of the third world and
Right,
how oppressive they were and how backwards and how advanced we Westerners um,
mm-hmm.
been and are, one of the points that was always raised is like, oh, they're always just listening to what their government says. And those
Right,
people, they need to be liberated
mm-hmm.
because they have been brainwashed by their government. So even if the people don't want democracy or
Right,
Western democracy, it is our duty, it is our manifest destiny to go in there and
right,
liberate them from
right,
their own
Right.
uh, from their own limited thinking and their backward approach.
And
And
there's a
so,
trickle down effect to that too. I mean, it's you see it on Twitter, you see it on Instagram. Somebody will post a comment and say, "Well, yeah, well, what about this? There's been a challenge, for example, to the PCR test." And somebody will chime in and go, "You don't know anything. You're not a scientist. Basically, get off Twitter. Shut up." I'm like, okay. Um, so if you don't again, it goes back to if you don't have that credential behind you, you can't possibly do your own research. You can't possibly be informed. You can't possibly form your own knowledge and form ideas and opinions about your world and the universe around you through your own inquiry. Um, because if it's not government sanctioned or approved, or through these, pillars of excellence, that where they've kind of sort of self-appointed themselves, it's not, it doesn't exist. Um, and it, I'm reminded of are both familiar with the movie where it speaks to a call for mothers to lean into their intuition, listen to a mother's intuition first. You know, that wisdom and that knowledge that you have that comes from within before you defer your knowledge to, the quote unquote guy in the white coat. It's a powerful message. It's an
most,
absolutely powerful message.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's like when moms, have had that inkling of intuition that like a
Yeah.
certain medical procedure or a medical intervention, it could be something as, related to birth. It could be related to like, cord clamping right upon birth. It could
Right.
be giving antibiotics for the sniffles. It could
Right.
be taking a vaccine. It
Right.
could be related to, keeping your kid in a sheltered and away from their grandparents for, whatever reason. And then
Right.
there's somebody that says, "Oh gosh, but that doesn't seem right."
Doesn't
But
feel right.
it doesn't
Right.
feel. Then
Right.
it's like we're taught to not listen to that because the person in the white coat, that authority is telling
Right.
us that this is what we need to do. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like we're taught to bow down to this authority.
Mm-hmm.
And like I feel like it's very like Middle Ages like,
Mm-hmm.
where it's very I mean it's no different for me than being told to listen to the priest. The
Sure.
priest is the one that has the connection to God. If
Mm-hmm.
they say that this is what God wants you to do, then you just need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I mean, we're a Protestant country here in
Mm-hmm.
the US, right?
Mm-hmm. By and large, yeah.
By and large,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. And so, um, I mean, I think one of the great things of the Protestant Reformation is this protesting this
Right.
singular interpretation of the Bible and
Mm-hmm.
saying, what? I have my own interpretation. I may not have the credential that you do, but
Mm-hmm.
I've read this book and I
Mm-hmm.
see it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And allowing people to bring their different perspectives and to have people listen to the different perspectives and see what feels right to them, And so for either for people to listen to different perspectives or going back to the mother's intuition and just saying, you know what? I don't even need to read what's there. I have this feeling of what I know is right for my child or for my own health. And it's come to me and I know it. And we've been taught that's not knowledge.
Right.
That's
Right.
acceptable, whether it's on social media or at the doctor's office or, for school, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, well, we've gotten basically to a place where I guess the government's going to decide for us what our knowledge is, what we should be listening to. And I think it's a very interesting place because you kind of almost have to not only now ask the question, how did we get here, but the question of what's next? What is the logical extension of deferring all knowledge to either state sanctioned authorities or to, sanctioned pillars of excellence, if you will, where the quote unquote citizen scientist is vilified, you know, whatever. What next? What does that mean for us? Um, and I think, and again, like you and I both said, I think we're in a very, very interesting place right now. Um, And I think we can probably come to consensus on how did we get here. I have, many, many perspectives, not the least of which is this idea that we have just reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced and domesticated, if you will, um, our learning, the way we've been educated. And then, of course, I think the next issue is how do we get out of this? I remember, I think I shared with you a story when I was in grad school and I had a professor, and he was feisty, grumpy, had 3 PhDs, super, super smart guy. And I was in the lecture hall with him, and he looked up, the classic sort of stadium style, the bleachers go up and all the students are kind of sitting around. And he looked up at the class, and one of the students, she raised her hand and she wanted to know, it was like first day of class, what was the reading assignment? And he goes, I don't have one. I already explained to you, you need to pick 3 books and you need to come back to me and tell me something about one of those 3 books. The student and the students, plural, were aghast, absolutely aghast, and completely were like flummoxed by the fact that they did not have their read, chapters 2 through 4, and then, summarize, write a bibliography, whatever, and then come back. But what he tried to get them to understand is there's a lot of information out there on a particular topic. It may be specific to international security affairs, or it may be specific to, a big broad topic, but come back and you tell me, just because I'm curious as to where you went. I'm curious as to what you read. I'm curious as to what you thought was important to bring back to the classroom in terms of information. Because his point was, I can spoon feed you these 2 chapters, and yes, you'll be able to, if you continue to read the prescribed chapters that you're supposed to read, you'll continue to do very well, and you will have covered the curriculum requirement, and you will have gone through the approved material, if you will. But also be prepared to come to class and tell me what else is out there, and share with me what else you read, that you thought was applicable to this big umbrella topic that we're here to discuss. It was fascinating. It was a moment in time for me to begin with. I was like, damn, that's an interesting way to teach. Yeah.
Yeah, about getting people out of their comfort zone.
Oh, it did too. Completely out of their comfort zone. Yeah, because they were actually literally forced to go into a library and go, gee, I don't know anything about this particular topic. Again, pick a topic, but they were forced to go in to a library and, gee, I don't know, what 3 books should I bring back? Because, I'm going to have to be able to say something about why I picked these 3 other books that weren't on the prescribed reading list. Um, and there was a lesson in that too, which is continue to read broadly, to continue to listen to what, somebody else's perspective is on the same topic. If I have, a knowledge base on complex system sciences, which I do, I also want to know who else is talking about the system sciences out there. What else is somebody talking about? There's one author in my sort of academic domain, if you will, that actually published a book called Unthinking the Social Sciences. He's basically saying undo what you've traditionally understood. It's a great topic, but engage in that.
Definitely. That's such a important approach, because like, we're so typically focused on just having like the straight and narrow. Okay, just tell
Mm-hmm.
me what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I remember when I was teaching, that one of the students, just one of the students, many of the students, like I was trying to get them to engage in the study of philosophy and humanities, and just talk about different
Mm-hmm.
thinkers and philosophers who I felt were inspiring, and trying to get them to feel some of that. And then it's just sometimes at the end of the class, when I would start to talk about, okay, well, the grades, and it was all about, okay, so what do I need to do to get an A?
Right. We've all been there. I get it.
And it's not something that's ingrained to us,
Right.
from childhood. But it's like while you're teaching, it's like, oh my gosh, I wish we could just focus less on that and just focus more on the subject at hand, so that we can learn something and broaden our perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then I mean, one of the great points that you raised, it just reminded me of a conversation that I was having recently with a friend, who's also a psychiatrist. and so we were talking about, the whole, pandemic, plandemic, depending on how you look at it.
Mhm.
And I was bringing some of these alternative perspectives to him.
Mhm.
And while, they were interesting for him, his default position was, you need to listen to what the authorities in the field are saying.
Yes.
And I'm saying, but I'm talking about, these are perspectives from other medical doctors like
Right.
yourself, some of which are also psychiatrists like yourself. And you say, no, but what counts is what the virologists are saying about this.
Right.
What counts is what the infectious disease
Right.
experts, Dr. Fauci, are
Mhm.
saying about these things. And so that just goes back to your point that, we've been taught to keep people isolated
Mhm.
and disciplines isolated, and to
Mhm.
suppress that citizen scientist.
Mhm.
So even if they're making a really important point, that, it's not part of what we should look at because they don't have the credential. So it's like, it's one thing to have to say that, oh, okay, so and so's not a doctor, they don't have that perspective, but they don't have that, the ability to speak authoritatively about it. But
Mhm.
even in the medical realm,
Mhm.
you know, it goes deeper. It's like, oh, you're not an infectious disease expert, so
Right.
you're not supposed to be able to give
Right.
a authoritative opinion about that. And so it's like, wow, I didn't realize the extent to
Yeah.
which we've been isolated from each
Well,
other.
it's interesting too, especially, I'm going to delve into a topic, the PCR topic. I was like, I was going to say something. Yeah, I mean, right now you have this very, very interesting debate going on between like-minded scientists, if you will. I would say not like-minded, that's the wrong word. Between scientists that are both ostensibly credentialed in the same field. This is kind of sort of the Yerden-Drosten issue. So if you go back and you look at the Drosten paper and the Drosten protocol, which largely informed a lot of the European usage and decision-making surrounding the use of the PCR test. And then lo and behold, you had another group of scientists in the same field, arguably, or more broadly speaking, came back and said, we reviewed your science and there was actually a lot of mistakes, critical flaws, and assumptions that went into the decision making about the use of the PCR test to begin with. And then just, more scientifically, specifically your specific protocols that you advocated for. And so there's this war going on right now. Between scientists, and some of them are, oh my God, this is the sacred cow right now. Obviously the PCR test is, it's like, don't touch it. This is what, everything is being driven by. It's like, you don't get your freedoms back unless, the PCR test comes back negative, basically. And that's an oversimplification, but I think going to the broader issue about even the competition between ostensibly like-minded or like credentialed authorities is interesting, because one has got the state backing and the other one doesn't. And I think that's probably the point I needed to make.
Mm.
Um, and it's brutal. It's an absolutely very, very intensely brutal discussion that's going on. So you can see the suppression of these scientists. You can see the attacks that are going on between them, because like, don't have an open and healthy debate. Bring it to the table. Bring it to the legislative bodies around the world to say they're competing thoughts on this particular issue. Let's have an open and honest debate about this, especially something as important as whether or not the PCR test is actually a flawed process, um, whereby everything else falls, everything hangs on that, you
Yeah.
know. Cases arising because somebody's had a quote unquote positive test. Well, if there's, reason to criticize that PCR false positive or positive test, I think we need to look into it.
Most definitely. And like you said, I mean, that's one of the important foundations of the entire, argument about, this number of cases and the number of associated deaths. And
Mm-hmm.
looking at that, now it's become like this holy test, because,
Right.
any criticism of it is suppressed, is censored. I
Right.
mean, people like, Dr. Thomas Cowan, Dr. Andrew Kaufman, people who've
Mhm.
been really looked into the science of it,
Mhm.
and many others, who've looked at the founder of the test itself
Mhm.
and
Yep.
been giving of the use of it. And that type of discussion is not allowed because it pokes big holes into the foundation that the government
Right.
approach the
But, I
science.
mean, why couldn't we
But
have had, a 3-day long conference, televised, streamed, whatever, where scientists came together and said to the public, we're going to, get after this particular pandemic through this particular type of testing, but there's some, differences of opinion. Um, and we're going to put that on the table, and we're going to welcome scientists from around the world to come together and basically, you know, put their 2 cents in. Didn't happen.
yeah, and I think everybody would love that, just knowing that this is something, okay,
Yeah.
we're all putting our perspectives out there and trying to get a better understanding of, where the potential flaws are and to see where we can put our knowledge together to have the best approach that's going to serve everybody.
Mhm.
Everybody would be on board with that. And and just the fact that there's so much suppression,
Well,
it's
that's it.
leads us to say, wait a minute,
Yeah.
what's really going on here? Is there this ulterior motive here? And it leads people like I mean myself, and this definitely applies to,
Absolutely.
when I see someone um, get censored, whether
Mhm.
it's on Facebook or Instagram
Right.
or whether it's traditional book burnings, whether it's thrown in jail, mysterious death, whatever it is, it leads me to say, wait a minute, there's got to be something going on with what this person said. Why is this triggering so much for
Mhm.
the authorities? And it's like I experienced it with my Iranian upbringing, with the government in Iran, and just seeing how, in a theocratic country
Mhm.
where there's an official government interpretation of how things should be and how religion is supposed to be interpreted.
Right.
And so it was always fascinating for me when I saw uh, people who had the same religious education that the government was sanctioning. And
Mhm.
if you study, religion, Islam in this institution, that's what we recommend, and that's the interpretation that needs to dominate society. And then you had people who were going to those institutions and saying, actually, you know what? I see
Actually, maybe not. Yeah.
what I see as being, is what, God is instructing for humanity. And here's my evidence.
Mhm.
Jailed,
Right.
banned from the
Right.
country,
Right.
sometimes executed. And it's like, my goodness. And then the more you study about some of these alternative perspectives, it's like, oh my gosh, they had such amazing insights. And so
Mhm.
I feel like it's the same with some of these scientists who are coming forward, some of these medical doctors
Mhm.
saying,
At
actually,
great personal risk. At great personal risk.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
like, what do they
Yeah.
have to gain from
Right.
this?
Right. I mean, this is no different than the mother that speaks out, unfortunately, at great personal risk to talk about her own child's injuries, and she may attribute them to the vaccine. She may attribute them to an environmental toxin. She might attribute it to, the glycophosphate. She may have ideas about how that injury happened, but at great personal expense, she speaks out. Um, and it's like, why are we doing this? This goes back to my, you read the bio, and it goes back to, I think, something you guys are trying to do within the health freedom movement as well is, amplify the stories. I want to hear your story. I want to know, you know, what you think. I want to hear, what is it that you observed? What was your intuition telling you? You know, how did you gain the information that that has now formed an idea in your mind that your child has been injured through some mechanism? Tell me your story. I want to hear it. I don't want to hear it from that patented, it's a what do you want to call it? A marketing slogan. Safe and effective is a marketing slogan. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear the story, from that mother. Amplify that voice. Get to that original source of information, and listen and learn from that. It's just so important. That's what informs our knowledge base as well. That's where we get those initial observations from when we see these things happening around us. And yet we're told, discount all that, wait till a doctor figures it out, and the doctor will tell you what has happened. Okay, got it.
I know and these are people who are speaking from personal experience.
Right, right,
Right? This is like such, I mean, it's this isn't something that they've simply, that they've read a theory about, right? This
right.
is something that they've experienced firsthand.
Yeah.
So I
And in
think
this day and age, at great personal expense, to speak out, because there's so many people that are just going to pounce on that story and try to either debunk it or vilify it, or basically say the mother's anti-science, or the mother doesn't have any science background and therefore she doesn't know what she's talking about.
so true. Wow. You're right. And it's like they have nothing to gain
Right,
personally from that and everything to lose. Like they're standing in society with their
right.
friends, social networks and yeah, because it takes a lot of courage to do that. And so
Yeah, so I know, for you guys, it's important too that, and I know I've had this conversation with you too, is, amplifying those voices, hear those stories, you know, ask them what are their stories, how do they understand, you know, um, the origins, if you will, of those injuries to their children, if that's the particular issue that they're concerned about. You know, talk to them. I know you and I had this conversation also, and I want you to talk to quote unquote the not the pretty people. It's like, go out and talk to, the everyday moms and dads out there, and hear their stories as well. Give them a chance to speak, and there's a lot of information out there. That's just one of the ways we learn, through the telling of those stories, and taking in that information. And along the way, you form connections too, um, and those are important, really, really important.
that's such a great point. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I feel like those stories, I think those are the things that leave the most powerful, inspiring impression
Hmm.
on it. Because like I remember, like watching the movie Vaxxed and seeing how the firsthand experience of those mothers and
Right,
just how they felt that their children may have been injured,
right,
from uh, those those shots that their doctor had told them to get, but they had an inkling not to, and just recognizing that that really happened to them. And it's just telling the story.
hmm
It's like we love stories. I mean, when I
hmm
read a story to my boy, like
hmm
before he goes to bed, it's just like, oh my god, it's like if he doesn't get that story, he's
right,
just not at ease to go
right.
to bed. I feel like we're even as adults, like we're the same way. We want to hear people's stories.
Absolutely, right, right. But now imagine then the mother that some critic will say she's ill-informed, or she's not scientific enough, or her religion was too strong, or I don't know, all of these criticisms that we see. It does a huge disservice, um, to the individual, specifically, a huge disservice to mothers and their intuition specifically as well. And I just think we need to get back to that place where, we talk to each other, we share. It goes back to, I was going to make point two. If I get all the way back to it, just pop back in. Um, It's the interdependence issue. Part of the system sciences complexity is this notion of interdependencies. We evolve and we co-evolve, we learn and we co-learn, we adapt. Adaptation is part of it, but we are connected to so many other you know things in our universe, if you will, but we're also connected to our stories and the individual experiences, and we need to share those and learn from them, and it's just all part and parcel of what I would say is the holism piece. So instead of going again back to that silo, of quote unquote excellence, that we're not supposed to challenge, let's broaden the aperture. Let's talk about the influence of all of these other um, ways that we can learn and generate knowledge and then ultimately wisdom, um, through those experiences, those other ways of learning, through the story and the observation that you had, the stories and the observations that I have as a mother and a grandmother, and to all of those other mothers that are out there. Listen to them and learn from them. And basically, obviously, my message at the end is, you know, don't worry about what the credentialed person has to say, and somebody probably lambaste me for that, but, it's not that they're not informed. It's not that it's not valid. It's just that we're in a space now, broadly speaking, where we're being told that that's the only source of information. And I would say, you know, read another book. Don't worry about what the professor told you. Don't worry about those 2 or 3 chapters. Go out and read another book. Get another perspective. Be a divergent thinker.
So true. Wow, that's great, great insight. And I just feel like it's something that like our society, I feel, needs right now because, you know, we're very directed as far as
Mhm.
where we get our knowledge from and where we
Oh,
can't.
right.
You know, we listen, and part of us really, I feel, hears these firsthand, experiences about different topics. Not just a variety of different topics. It could be medical, it could be uh, philosophical, social science, anything. It's like we hear them when in our social networks, whether it's interacting with people, just on the phone or in person or chatting, whatever it is, but we don't give it authority in our um, in our understanding of what is real, like what is true and what is not. Like we'll hear it in that moment and somewhere it'll resonate, but then when it comes to the point of making decisions for how we need to live our lives that are hitting those specific areas, we default to, well, what did the authorities say? I
Right.
know I have this
Oh, we're
firsthand.
told to. We're told to. Every single media outlet right now is being told default to what the authority says. Yeah.
Wow.
As if there's only one body of knowledge out there. Like, really? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Not buying it, but okay. Um,
Really what you're gonna be asking for now? It's like one of the things that was important to me when studying religion was recognizing that each different interpretation, both within a religious tradition
mhm,
and the multiple religious traditions, they
mhm,
have something beautiful to offer.
mhm.
And if we just try to, you know, relegate things to just one perspective within a religion or to just one religion at the expense of others, like
Mhm.
we're we're basically saying, you know what, we just want the color yellow from the rainbow.
Right.
The color
Yeah.
yellow is beautiful, it's
Oh,
amazing,
all
but
right. It,
why deprive ourselves of red, orange, green, indigo, purple? It's like there's this, and all of it together has just so much to offer. And it's when the authorities are telling us just to stay with one.
well, again, it goes back to right now, the definition of health is, what is it? Wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands frequently, um, and get the vaccine. And if that is the definition of health, we've missed the mark completely. It's that social connection. It's all of the other. Again, it goes back to the mental health issues. It goes back to the other things that inform our well-being, that it's not just existing, it's living. We want to live as well. And this goes back to my concept of risk and the idea that there is going to always be uncertainty in life. And if we try to hermetically seal ourselves away from risk, to the point where our loved ones are now going to be either seen through a glass window or, some piece of plexiglass, or our businesses are going to go under, and, mental health suffers. Again, I go back to, we have fundamentally not understood the definition of health, because we've had one set of experts say, this is what health is. This is how we're going to mitigate this particular problem. And where were all the other ones? Where were the economists in this? Where were the mental health professionals in this? Where were the, all the other experts, if you will, that also came to the table and say, these are going to be the devastating second and third order consequences of this particular strategy? That, oh, by the way, is, again, we're compounding. It's like the PCR test. We're compounding errors on top of errors on top of errors, and it goes back to, what is our future going to look like if we just continue down this path? We've got to stand up and ask these questions and talk to each other and engage. It's like you and I have this conversation. It's like, share these conversations, have them, and if we have to do this virtually, so be it. But let's continue these conversations, and bring those perspectives to the table. We need more of it.
So true. Yeah, thank you so much. Such important insight and breadth, to this collective conversation, that we're having. It's like, so we so often just, limit it to, one specific area of focus. It's like, whether it's, so should I get the shot? Should I not get the shot? Should I, should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? Well, let's take a look at this from a broader perspective. Just asking some of these questions that you are. It's like, what is the definition of health?
Right. Define it. Right.
Definition
of health. Definition of medical freedom. Those are all important issues. Definition of reductionism. I have in one of my bios on one of my social media accounts, reductionism bad. Quit reducing everything down to these singular issues. Look at all of the complexities of the issue. You don't have to be a system scientist or complexity scientist to understand that there are interdependencies and there are connections to all of these other topics. You cannot look at the whole being, the well-being of an individual only through virus reduction mitigation measures. You've got to look at their health and their mental health, their economic and social health. All of those come into play, because we're human beings. We're not just this organism, this carbon-based life form that somehow or other it's been labeled as, I now need to preferentially decide that you're presumptively sick before I engage with you.
Wow.
Yeah, all of these conversations crept in this year, and it's very, very, very interesting to figure out how we engage, how we raise this to bring these conversations to the public square, how we continue to find out what are the ways that we need to raise our concerns to our legislative bodies or whatever. But we need to have these conversations. More and more and more. I think we need to, number one, as I say as a mother and a grandmother, I would say to my daughter and my granddaughter, number one, first and foremost, learn how to keep your own counsel. And second of all, I say to my girls, know your own voice. Find it, know it. This is important. This is important not just in child rearing, but it's own your own opinions, speak them, keep your own counsel, and figure out ways to, use your voice, find it, don't let it get suppressed.
Wow. Well said. Thank you so much, Jack. That was so beautiful and inspiring. And just, someone with your breadth of background and experiences, it's just such an honor to have you share your wisdom with our audience. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Sahil. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. And if if you mentioned your social media, if our audience would like to learn more about you or to follow some of your work, is there
So,
any?
you know what's interesting right now? I'm very, very seriously thinking about taking down my Instagram account because of all of the draconian rules that they've just come out with. Um, but let me provide this to you after. I've got to figure out what platform I'm going to jump to, um, and we'll go from there.
Well,
Because
yeah, I'll publish in the description or in the caption of the video so that our audience can follow you to learn more and to get more of your insights. So
yeah, well, again, I want to thank you for amplifying voices writ large. You know, I followed you. I appreciate your interviews. I love the guests that you bring on board, and it's raising these voices. And we all have a different perspective. And I would like to say I'm not one of the the big social media accounts that I know you brought on, but it's important. I think the work that you're doing as well to amplify voices. So I very much appreciate that.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And so, with that, I want to thank our audience. Thank you so much for being with us. Many blessings to you all. And we will continue to be in touch. Thank you so much, Shaq. It was an
Thank
honor.
you. Thank you, so appreciate it.